Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for the finale of our inaugural Summer Book Club. We've got people from all over New South Wales and a few from interstate joining us this evening, which is fantastic. And our guest presenter is from interstate, so that's exciting. My name is Sarah Morley. I'm a curator here at the State Library of New South Wales. And tonight I have the pleasure of talking to Amelia Mellor, award-winning author of The Grandest Bookshop in the World, but we'll get to Amelia in a minute. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which the library is built and on which I am today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I'd like to also extend my gratitude to any Aboriginal people joining us tonight. So many of you are joining us this evening because you've participated in our summer reading book club. Some of you may have just picked it up on social media or all seen it as an event that you'd like to join, which is fantastic as well. But for those of you that aren't familiar with indyreads, indyreads is an ebook and audiobook platform that was developed by the State Library of New South Wales for our New South Wales Public Library Network. It's been rolled out over the last year or so to all 363 public libraries in New South Wales. So what the platform aims to do is deliver library members free access to the very best titles that we have, independent Australian publishers and authors, but it also contains a diverse collection of international titles, independent titles, award-winning literature, classic literature, a whole heap of genre literature, and it's easily accessible at your fingertip for you to carry around in your pocket. So for the inaugural indyreads Summer Book Club, we were delighted to offer public library members access to Amelia Mellor's award-winning novel, The Grandest Bookshop in the World. The book club is a wonderful opportunity to share the titles with borrowers all around the state. We've had new borrowers signing up to the indyreads platform, which has been fantastic. We'd like to thank the Affirm Press and of course Amelia for partnering with the State Library of New South Wales for this opportunity, and it's been incredibly successful. So I'm sure that we'll be doing this sort of thing annually from now on, and hope that you'll join us for that. To our guest tonight, Amelia Mellor. Amelia began her writing career as a secondary school resident playwright in Year 11. She studied creative writing at the University of Melbourne and completed a thesis on the reinvention of the Industrial Revolution in children's fantasy literature. In 2018, she won the May Gibbs Children's Literature Trust's Ivan Wilson Memorial Fellowship for The Grandest Bookshop in the World. In 2021, her title, Grandest Bookshop in the World, won the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award, the Patricia Wrightson Prize for Children's Literature. All these titles of these awards are so long, so bear with me. And she also had the pleasure of winning the children's category of the Indie Book Awards. Amelia Mellor, thank you for joining us tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here. I always love a good virtual event.
We're getting good at them now, aren't we?
It's the only type I've done. So, yeah.
Good.
Welcome, everybody.
Well, I guess I've got a stack of questions to ask you. I guess it's not going to be rehashing the plot necessarily, because whilst that's interesting, we've all read the book, so we're not going to do a stock standard book club session here. We're going to talk to you about who you are, your processes, how you came to write the book. So I guess one thing that I read recently that I guess I thought would be nice to start with is I read that when you were 3 years old, you said you wanted to work in a bookshop surrounded by books that you had written. Is that true?
That is true. We were driving to the chemist and Mum just asked me, and I don't know what she was expecting, but that was what I said. I think I said it because I didn't know that writer was a job. I knew working in a shop was a job. So I specified that I wanted to be working in a shop, but it had to be books that I'd written. So now I've done both of those parts, but I haven't done them together. So,
There's
you know,
still time.
there's time. And
So were you always like, once you could write, was this always a passion of yours?
Oh, I would like rehearse my vocabulary for the day as a baby in my cot. And then we've got like home videos of me doing like a dramatic performance, retelling the story of how we buried my pet chicken. And then there's like, I threw away some of the longer ones that I did when I was little, but we do have a story still from when I was 8 about 2 girls fighting a sea monster. Yeah, I went pretty quickly from memoir to fantasy. But I was writing all the way through high school. I would get in trouble for doing it in class. After I finished all my work, of course, for any of my students who might be watching. And I would be like on the bus every day, because the bus from Red Hill to Mount Eliza was 45 minutes each way. I would be sitting there with my computer wedged between my stomach and the seat in front of me. I also am fortunate in that I don't get motion sick. So I would be, if I wasn't reading, I would be writing on the bus every day to and from. Everyone kind of like knew that that was my thing. Exactly. And yeah, it was really enjoyable, and it helped me through some tough times as well. And I ended up writing the middle school play in 2011 when I was a year 12 myself. So I wrote the play over the summer holidays, and then the year 7s and 8s put it on later that year. Yeah, I sort of, that was my first sort of major success, even though it was only just my one play in school. And then I just kept going for it, and I eventually got Grandest published, and it exploded.
Yeah, no, well, obviously you had your eye on the prize from a very young age, and that was so ambitious and knew what you wanted to do. But
I'm a planner.
So
I very rarely deviate from the plan.
Well, I mean, the idea, I mean, you've talked about writing fantasy from a young age. Is that your favoured, and your PhD is in fantasy literature? Is that your favoured genre?
Well, yeah. If we look at the general gist of most of the stories I've written, from when I was a really little kid, we've got sea monsters, ghosts,
yep.
Giant crab creatures. What else did I do? Lots of magic, lots of like machines. Yeah. So sometimes I do a bit of, sometimes I stray into sci-fi, but I consider myself a fantasy writer, which is, I suppose, why it was such a surprise to get nominated for historical awards as well. But I'm also a massive fact geek, so a lot of research went into Grandest as well. So it was nice to be recognised for that.
Yeah. Look, I want to touch on that, but I want to talk about it a bit later. I wanted to first talk about where on earth did you get the idea to write Grandest Bookshop in the World? Obviously, it's based on a real place, but can you tell us a bit about how you came up with that idea to focus on that?
Certainly. Actually, it was about a month after another story of mine had been rejected at acquisitions, and I actually was considering that I might never get published at all. So that was when I was actually planning to start my master's degree, because I thought, oh well, if I never get published, at least I can be the fun drama teacher who does original productions. But I was at a friend's house and she had this. Virtually the same. This isn't hers. I didn't steal it from her house, but she had one of these, Cole's Funny Picture Book. It was actually the #2 edition. And I asked her what on earth that was. And she's one of those wonderful people who gets really obsessed with something. So she had found one of these in a secondhand bookshop or something like that, and she goes, "Oh, I've got to tell you all about Cole's Book Arcade." And all of a sudden she was bringing out, you know, like other books about it and reading me whole chapters about it. And I said, A, how have I got to be 24 and never heard of this? And B, that's a pretty awesome idea for a kid's book. And she goes, "It is, isn't it?" And I went, "Oh gosh, oh no, not for me." But it sort of stuck in my head, and I went home and I went, well, okay, what could it be if I did do it? And then because my wonderful friend is so enthusiastic, we planned a trip to the Melbourne Museum the following week. And I saw all the artifacts from the arcade in there, and we went to the State Library. And in the State Library, I discovered this, which is a biography of E.W. Cole written by his grandson. And as soon as I found out that it wasn't just Mr. Cole, the wonderful sort of Melbourne's Willy Wonka of books, as soon as I found out that it wasn't just him, it was his wife and 6 kids living there as well, I went, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. There's 6 kids and they live in a 3-story bookshop theme park thing.
It's hard to believe it existed, doesn't it?
I know.
It's amazing.
I know, but there's the most incredible photos in that biography. And so once I knew that the 6 kids were there and that there were as many different departments as there were, it simply had to happen from there. And it was a real boost too when I applied for the Ian Wilson Memorial Fellowship, because it had to be, you had to be an unpublished author with a distinctively Australian project, and it had to be for children. So I thought, I reckon I'm really in with a shot on this one. And so when I actually got it, it was hugely encouraging. I think I wrote about the first maybe quarter of Grandest while I was on that fellowship. No, because I'd already started it. So I did write about a third to a quarter of it, other way around, a quarter to a third of it when I was there, but I'd actually been going on it for a couple of months by the time I went on the fellowship.
So when we talk about the fellowship, did you go and stay somewhere, or did they just fund your project, or how did that work?
Well, I have a history of overcommitting. So it was in March of what year? 2018, which happened to be the second week of my master's degree. So I went to uni for a week, and then I dropped everything and flew to Adelaide for 3 weeks.
Okay.
And I stayed in one of their beautiful little studios right near the Adelaide Zoo. And so while I was there, I did some research. I was just reading this, but I was also doing practical research. Like I visited the sorts of places that resembled arcade departments. So I went to like an old-fashioned lolly shop, and I went to the zoo and stuff like that to check out the monkeys and the parrots, because the arcade had monkeys and parrots in its fernery. And yeah, when I wasn't researching, I was writing or visiting the Adelaide Writers Festival, or frantically trying to keep up with my uni assignments. So yeah, it was 3 weeks, and they supported that, and they gave, gave funding for that as well. It was seriously, it was amazing. I don't think I've done anything like it since.
It's a fantastic opportunity to be able to have that time to devote to creative work.
Oh, it's great. And they've got the fact that one is for unpublished authors as well is amazing. They do have creative time for established authors as well. Although I have to say, right now, my life is being like on the fellowship all the time, because this semester I'm fortunate enough that I can take my foot off the accelerator with teaching. So yeah, but the difference with the fellowship is that I had like a group of fairy godmothers who would always be like checking on me and bringing me chocolate biscuits and stuff like that. They're wonderful. They're wonderful. So yeah, if you have a project that fits those parameters, anyone listening, definitely don't overlook it, because it's an amazing opportunity.
And it leads to things like this. It works. So I guess what I'm interested in, and I suspect everybody, is your creative process. Do you have a standard creative process, or is it different do you develop ideas differently for each work? How do you work?
Ooh, usually I start with a character in a setting, or sometimes more than one. And often when I begin, they don't have names. I find the names as I go. Grandest was a little different because it was similar, I guess, actually, because my friend told me about the arcade, so that was the setting. The first character was, of course, Mr. Cole, but the Grandest was different because I got the title before I even knew about Pearl and Vally. The title, The Grandest Bookshop in the World, comes from one of Mr. Cole's ads in 1883 when the arcade opened. If I remember correctly, it said something like Cole's new book arcade, because it was his second one. Cole's new book arcade will open on Cup Day. It is the finest site in Melbourne and the grandest bookshop in the world. Intellectual non-racing people are invited to go there instead of the races. The thing about that story is, though, everyone went to both. So the arcade's opening was kind of like dead for most of the day, sort of no one was there. They were all at the races. And then when the races finished, they all scrambled to the arcade, probably half cut, and just
That's
like
Melbourne.
Crammed in there. It was actually where a great opportunity for Mr. Cole to show off his marketing genius, because there were so many people in there, crammed in so tightly, and the day was so hot, and they were all in the big, ridiculous Victorian dresses and suits and everything else, that like it was getting really uncomfortable, and there was starting to be a crowd crush, which can be quite dangerous. They didn't have the big crinolines there, but those were dangerous back in the day. And that was the point at which these little coins that Mr. Cole had been sprinkling around the street as sort of like in-store vouchers, that was the point at which those actually became the admission tickets because he saw this massive crowd. He was upstairs watching on the balcony with the 4 oldest kids and a very pregnant Mrs. Cole. And he saw what was happening from the top of the balcony because the arcade was 3 stories tall. And so he scrambled down the stairs and he said to his lads, his boys, his guys who were working there, he told them to start charging threepence for his little Cole coins. So previously those had just been, he'd just been sprinkling them around the streets and getting the boys to sprinkle them around the streets as well. And, you know, because they looked like a sovereign, which was a £1 coin, a gold coin. And so people would think they were money, pick them up and then see, oh, bring this to Cole's Book Arcade and get 5 free pencils, like that kind of thing. But that day that the arcade opened was the point at which they became something really special. They became the tickets to get in. And after that, he started putting little messages on them as well. And I have been building them up because I want to show them to you. I have 2 of them. I didn't have them while I was writing Grandest, but I did manage to find them after. Because one good thing that has come out of COVID is that everybody went and cleaned their attics and their garages, and they put these on eBay for me. So here we have Humanity as Progress. That's a fern on the one side and his symbol, the rainbow, on the other. And the first side says, humanity is progress. The reign of ignorance and force is going. The reign of knowledge and humanity is coming. I sure hope so. And
it's coming again.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, compared to the 1800s, we've come a very long way, but we haven't quite achieved the utopia that Mr. Cole predicted by the year 2000. Here's my other coin. And this one is interesting because the other thing that was really cool about Mr. Cole, aside from just being a wonderful bookseller and, you know, somebody who knew how to entertain families, he was also a strong proponent of racial equality and educational equality. And one thing he did with these little coins was that he adapted lessons and like sort of golden rule stuff, treat others how you would like to be treated kind of thing, because in his day it was much more common to be like, oh, people from other countries are very weird and they have these beliefs that are not like our beliefs because they're evil. But what he did was he firstly, he wrote a lot of essays about it, but this coin is special because it says, be good and do good, Hindu maxim on one side, and the other one says, pure thoughts, pure words, pure deeds. It says Parsi maxim, but he means Farsi, like Arabic. And this one has the fern on the one side, which you saw, and the olive leaves and the rainbow on the other side. Sorry, I'm fully geeking out. I love them so much. They're so special.
I think you're amongst friends here. That's fantastic. And look, I believe the police were required to manage the crowd on opening day. There wouldn't be many bookstores nowadays that would require police at their opening. No, it was, the book arcade was really amazing. It was so popular, but something that people ask me about with Grandest is they ask me about the departments. I did not make up one single department. I gave them a bit of a magical twist, but all the departments in Cole's Book Arcade were there at some point. So it was more than a bookshop. It also had, for those of you who may not have read it or may have just started, or it might have been a while,
It really did have the lolly shop, the toy shop, the band, the tea salon, which he actually established to fight racism. He started that to bring in more Asian staff and get his mostly white customers to sort of engage with people from different cultures in that way. What else did it have? It really had the monkeys. It really had the fun house. It really had the parrots and the fernery, of course. And it really had their flat at the top. The only room that I actually made up was the storage room where they find Ruby. Spoilers, no spoilers, it's chapter 4. I changed the locations of some of the rooms and made them like magically bigger, or put them in places where they actually were not in real life, but none of the departments are made up. It was, first of all, the arcade was huge, but second, it really was this full-on theme park. I will say not all of the departments fit into the 3-story structure on Burke Street Mall. There was a little extra part out the back down Howie Place where some of the departments were, but they were all part of the arcade. And in fact, the Howie Place section is the only relic that's still there.
Why do you think it was so big for such a short-ish period of time? It's so sad that it didn't survive.
Yeah, look, I don't know why it had to be demolished.
Progress.
Yeah. When it opened in the early 1880s, it opened in 1883. The shop that had been there before was called, it was the Spanish Restaurant. Interesting that there was only one, but that was what they did back in those days. So Mr. Cole had that place knocked down and completely rebuilt it. And then the arcade ran from 1883 to 1929 and was knocked down in 1931. So it only lasted about 10 years after he died. Yeah. But it had about a 40-year run or so. So yeah, unfortunately it was bad business management that killed it.
And he was such a character. I mean,
he was too, and he had such a passion for it that he didn't even care if people shoplifted. Like his manager, Mr. Pike, who is the main character of my next book, actually, was the one who sort of ran all the boots on the ground stuff once the second arcade was established. Mr. Cole got into writing and he started to spend more and more time in his office creating the funny picture books and creating his essays about, the brotherhood of humanity. And I use brotherhood specifically because he was not perfect. He was a very interesting person, but he was of his time. So he was a little sexist, a little like, there were certain things that he said that wouldn't be acceptable now, but for the time he was pretty incredible. But anyway, my point is, Mr. Cole was so passionate about the business that he didn't even care about shoplifters. Mr. Pike was dealing with them and he was like, "Sir, we've got to do something about the thieves." And Mr. Cole's like, "Oh, don't worry about thieves. At least they'll be educated thieves."
Good point. At least they're reading.
Exactly. And, it's a pity that even with the read for as long as you like, no one asked to buy rule, that people were still stealing. However, poverty is what it is, and if you can sell a book, then
you need to eat. You can't
and
eat
you're in those, and you're in that position, you are going to steal. So, or you may steal. I shouldn't shouldn't say you are going to, but like, you know, I can understand, particularly during the recession in the 1890s, I can understand why,
Absolutely.
you know, desperate people acted the way that they did. But yeah, it was just such a passion of his that he didn't even really mind if things didn't work out. But that same passion did also bring the arcade through some tricky times. When that recession in the 1890s hit, this is just turning into history lecture, but when that recession in the 1890s hit, Mr. Cole's solution was not to downsize, but to expand. So he refused to fire anyone during that time. He added more departments during that time, and he fought against the early closing act that the council had put in place, because he was like, this is a haven. People can come here and get entertained and educated for free. We are bolstering spirits during this recession, and you shouldn't close us down. So, yeah, he really inspires me with how optimistic he was.
Yeah.
Which
he was so forward thinking, right? And so inclusive, all the multicultural aspects of his business. It was really
and universal education was a really big one of his. He was proposing that schools be completely overhauled way before anyone else was talking about it. So yeah, he had some really interesting progressive ideas, and some great predictions as well about what the future would and should look like. That whole idea, humanity as progress, that was on my little coin, that was his way of saying that, you know, universal human rights were the way to progress society forward. Like, there was no point in technological progress or scientific understanding if you didn't, you know, improve the lot of everyone on earth. So yeah, I sometimes I get a little bit, you know, I see the flaws in his phrasing or his arguments and stuff, but his messages were at heart really positive and progressive.
Yeah. So I guess I laugh now when you say it was good to get the historical award. I mean, this novel hands it to if it's not being studied in every school soon, I won't believe it, because there's so much going on. It documents that Victorian era so well, all of the issues of, you know, society at the time, you know, even the high infant mortality rates, you know, with the family losing Ruby and the impact. There was so much death, more so back then, of infants, and the impact on family. There are so many different aspects that are so valuable for kids to be reading and studying, and it's a fun read. It's you know, whole fantasy, adventure, magical. It's there's a lot going on, and whilst I loved all the books I studied at school, this is like handing it on a platter. It's got everything. Now, and you've used the characters from, some are real, you do the children are real characters, but there are characters from the shop that you've used, or identities rather, for characters.
Pretty much the only one who's completely made up is the Obscuro Smith. And he was inspired by the Cole books in a really big way. And by Cole's character, actually, because, you know, when I was just starting out, I thought, okay, we obviously need some conflict in here, because a story about a nice family is very sweet, but isn't gonna drive us through an exciting action-filled plot. So what I did when I was creating Magnus was I thought, okay, what if I took some of the things that made Mr. Cole so wonderful and I flipped them? So, you know, intellect into cleverness and like slyness, a love of good, clean fun into a love of fun at other people's expense. But a lot of the way that Magnus talks and works was inspired by this, which is Cole's Intellect Sharpener, which is where I got some of the riddles and where I got the inspiration for the riddles that I made up. So there are some gems in here for sure. And then there's others that just didn't age well at all because the wordplay doesn't translate, or because they refer to things that were current at the time. And then, yeah, so this was a really valuable one as well. Some of them still work. Some of them just kind of made me go,
not so much.
Yeah, it's like, what does that mean? So,
and look, I found some of the interactions with this between the siblings were so realistic. And did you have inspiration for that?
Oh boy, did I. I'm the oldest of 4 children. And we also grew up in a house that was a bit crazy. We always had tons of pets. We didn't have parrots or monkeys, but we always had tons of pets. We had tons of cousins as well. So the house was always full of kids running around, playing, bickering. But the kids bickering in Grandest is actually quite important. I had somebody online complaining about how much the kids fight, but they fight because, you know, because they're broken, because Ruby's gone and they're trying to navigate this absence. But yeah, the kids were partly I was inspired by what I could find out about them, and partly I was inspired by my own family. Pearl, for instance, I read her book Novelty Evenings, and I was also thinking about the kind of person that one of my sisters is, who is the second youngest in the family as well. And so like her cheekiness and her sort of way of defying what the rest of the family is doing, that came from my sister. But I was also inspired by what I could, pictures of her I could find, and her writings as well. And I did that with everyone as much as I could, actually. But there's a lot of the Mellors in the Coles, I've got to say.
So when you have a character, do you have a picture of them in your mind as you're developing their personality, or how do you? The looks come really early, and I'll show you what I do. Very early in the process, I like to do a character page. So I am just an okay artist. Oh, you can't see them, it's too bright. But if you're holding it right there, it's okay.
Oh, okay. Or you can't see the pencil ones though.
Oh, no.
But anyway, this is my first sketch of Val, tripping backwards over Ebenezer here. If I turn the page
down,
we
can.
There we go. Now you can see it. These are all the faces and expressions that I tried. Some of them are not really him. That's more Eddie, I think. And I was working from this photo.
Ah, yes.
Of the real Val as an adult. So like I reverse engineered his face a picture as an adult. Pearl's down here. I found 2 for Pearl. One was a photo and one was a sketch from one of the funny picture books where she's putting on a concert for her dolls. And I tried some different hairstyles and stuff, and then I ended up with her there. I think that is the most Pearlish face that I've done. And then I've got the others here as well. Mr. Cole is here. Yep. There we are, there he is. And favourite magnificent bastard is here as well. That's that's his face in my head. He's a little different on the cover, but different artists do different things. And then sometimes I just draw scenes as well. I've got this one from when they find Ruby in the storeroom. I've got some colour ones. I've got this one from when they dance in when they cross dress.
Yes. Oh wow.
So yeah, I enjoy drawing. It's part of my creative process. I'm far from professional, like,
but it's part of the process, right?
But it's part of how I get to know them. And yeah, I do that usually pretty early in the process, when I'm learning who they are, and I just try and find, like, because different characters actually do expressions in different ways. Something that, you know, as a kid or a teenager that you might do when you're learning to draw expressions is you might do one of those expression sheets, and the book or the internet source that you're on will say, do this to make a character look happy, do this to make a character look angry. But actually, you need to find how that character expresses it, not just sort of copy off the resource, because, you know, different people express to different degrees as well.
Yeah, yeah. Now I do have a few more things to cover, but I've just realized that at the beginning I forgot to let everybody know there will be time for questions. So
Yeah.
If you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, and I'll try and get to as many as we can. And Amelia is happy to answer your questions, but we do have, I suppose, we've got an hour in total, so we've got about 15 more minutes. I guess if you're okay with talking, you've mentioned that you're working on a prequel. Are you able to give us any insights into what your next book's going to be about?
Certainly. It's called The Bookseller's Apprentice. It is set in Paddy's Market in 1871, so before the Cole children are born, and it follows the adventures of young Billy Pike, Mr. Cole's first and longest serving employee, and there are a couple of familiar faces, but not many. So you'll see Mr. Cole is back. Mr. Pike is back as his child self, but also the Obscura Smith's in there as well. And then there's all sorts of other mad characters I discovered in the course of researching Paddy's Market, which was another real place in Melbourne. It was the first iteration of the Queen Victoria Market, and that was a very fascinating place as well. Yeah. A little bit less family friendly than the arcade, perhaps, but certainly another really interesting place. Yeah, I've crammed that book full of historical tidbits as well. So that's coming in October this year. Just working on the third draft now. So
watch this space.
Yep.
Do you
not long to go.
Is this something you'd like to pursue? An ongoing series, obviously, depending on the success of the second, I suppose, or do you have plenty more ideas for other items you'd like to work on, other storylines?
Oh, I don't think I'll ever run out of ideas. There's so many ideas. It's funny because something that non-writers say is, oh, where do you get your ideas? I'm like, everywhere. Some of the things, the smallest things can inspire a book or part of a book. For instance, in my new book, Billy's little siblings, he has like 6 little siblings. I got some of the way that they speak from the foundation kids last year when I was working in a primary school. So, you know, you can find ideas anywhere. I do miss the Coles a little bit, but honestly, at the moment, I'm so focused on just getting Apprentice done that I don't know what I want to do next. I have a couple of possibilities written down somewhere, but I'm trying to stay on track with Apprentice for now. Exactly. And then once it goes to print, then I'll be able to go, right, what's next? No doubt a firm will as well.
When I was reading your book, at the end, I came to my head just about exploded, and I said, oh my goodness, this translates perfectly to cinema. It's just, there's so much going on, and it's Australian. It could be a blockbuster. Has anyone approached you with ideas of you know, a mini series or a film? I just, is anyone out there?
I would love it if it did make it to the screen. Yeah. And it's interesting that people say it's cinematic as well, because I'm so visual when I'm imagining it. You can, you know, see from the drawings. You know what? It's only recently that I found out that not everybody imagines things in like crystal clear detail. When some people don't visualize at all. So yeah, I'd love to see it make it to the screen. But you know, even things like, even if it were to get like optioned or something, that doesn't always necessarily mean that it makes it to the screen. So yeah, I would love that.
I suppose for me, it's not every book has that potential. You love a book, and some of your favorite books you just can never see, and you hear about it happening and you go, oh, that's a bit weird. But this, I feel, is the sort of story that you know, there's a certain element of darkness and adventure and mystery, but also having the kids in there as well helps to lighten that darkness as well. So it's an interesting thought, I suppose.
Oh, thank you. I would love to see it adapted. You know, that's something that's been, when I saw my first play adapted when I was, you know, 18, it really, the idea that something that had just been in my head could be made real for so many people was a really big deal. So Sarah, you've got so many wonderful questions, but I see that the listeners have some wonderful questions as well. So yep. As we've only got 10 minutes, I think we better get on to them.
Right. Well, there's a quick one whilst I'm reading them. Was Coles Arcade in Australia, Melbourne, or Melbourne somewhere else?
No, it was in our Melbourne. It was on Burke Street Mall. It was 299 Burke Street. And there were some other ones around Australia, but none of them were as big as that one. That was like the big one, the main one. You can see part of it still there. The Howie Place section has a little glass roof on it that Mr. Cole installed without council permission. And it also has so if you're going down Little Collins Street and you stand facing Howie Place, on the right-hand side, you'll see a sandstone building. I think it's currently a fashion outlet. That's where the toy shop was. So you can still find a trace of the arcade where it was, but you'll probably learn more about the arcade at the Melbourne Museum, sadly, because it disappeared pretty quickly, and there's really only just that one little roof and the sandstone toy shop left now. But it was Melbourne's. It was definitely ours.
Melbourne, Australia.
Exactly. It was. There were some other Coles Book arcades but they were not as big and they didn't have all the departments. But the business got big enough that Cole was able to expand to Sydney and Adelaide as well. And I don't know where else. I think Linda also called her bookshop Cole's Book Arcade. Linda's the oldest daughter. She tried to carry on the legacy, but the Depression finished off her shop, unfortunately.
Yeah. Look, a question here about your audience. You write for teens. Does your audience matter? Do you specifically write for that middle grade, or what do you like to write? Who do you like to write for?
Well, I like to write for myself as a kid. So I actually envisioned the ideal reader of Grandest as being a kid in about grade 5, but a kid in about grade 5 as I was in grade 5. So it's packed full of weird stuff, and it's, you know, got loads of plot threads going on because that was the kind of thing that I liked to write. We've been selling Grandest to that middle grade crowd, so 9 to 12-year-olds. That said, I've got letters from 13 and 14-year-olds too. I do get a bit worried when people say that anyone under 8 has been reading it because it's spooky.
I was spooked, yeah.
Look, I don't want 5-year-olds thinking about the whipping machine, but parents write to me and say, my 6-year-old is loving it. And I go, how far are you in?
Yeah, all kinds. So another person has said that she found it interesting that you went to the zoo and other locations to research. Do you find visiting real locations helps your creative process?
Definitely. It helps you to sort of notice details that photos alone and other stuff can't do. Like something that I noticed when I went to the old-fashioned lolly shop in Melbourne, which eventually led to me writing the sweet shop scene, was the feeling that I got when I walked in. And in the moment that I walked in, I was like, I'm going to buy as many as I want because I'm researching. At that moment again, I felt like a kid again. Things like the coolness when you step into a fernery, for instance. I always love to check out a fernery if I'm near one, like at Ridley or the Botanic Gardens, or one that I like at the moment that's right near where I'm living is the little one in King's Domain, which is just outside the Royal Botanic Gardens. So definitely being in a place and just experiencing it can really help. I went to the Queen Vic Market as I was researching Apprentice too. When I went to the zoo, actually, one thing that I did that I didn't do anywhere else was I sat down and drew some of the animals, and, you know, really paid attention to, particularly the cockatoos, paid attention to their mannerisms and how, like, they fluff up their cheeks and how they climb on things with their feet and stuff like that. So I certainly do like to, wherever possible, do a bit of experiential research as well. It was hard with Apprentice because I was living in the Alpine Valley, and so it was really difficult to get to Melbourne because of COVID. And even when I went to the market, the experience wasn't as full on as I was hoping for because of those measures. That said, I've been in lots of markets before, particularly those in developing countries, which is really more what it would have been back in those days here too. So yeah, it's definitely important that I know what a place feels like, which is why I don't think I would ever write like a Lord of the Rings style fantasy, because I've never been to Europe. Maybe if I went to Europe, I would. That said, the market's pretty saturated for those fantasy worlds. So I like to go to a place that feels like the setting of a world that I'm doing, so that I know what kind of details to put in.
Yeah. Look, that's a nice segue to this question. Once you have the character and the setting, what happens next? And what does your writing day look like during the initial writing stage? Do you have a ritual?
Oh, I wish I had a ritual. Things always seem to get in the way. Someone wrote to me a while ago and said, how many words do you write in a day? I don't know if they were expecting me to do like a Stephen King style. I do 2,000 words before lunchtime, but no. In a day, I do 0 words or 2,000 words. I might start at 9 o'clock with a cup of coffee and then just burn through the rest of the day there, or I might get up, do an hour or two, go shopping, because it's really hard to focus when I have chores to do. That's the problem. But it's a vicious cycle because I love writing so much. So like I'll set aside a day to do all my chores, then I might sit down at lunchtime and go, I'll just finish tweaking that chapter. And then before I know it, my chores day has gone out the window. That said, I am settling more into a routine now that I'm in my new flat, now that I don't have that, now that I don't have to fit writing around teaching. So I was much better at keeping a routine when I was at Glenfern, if anyone's heard of Glenfern Writers Studios, because I would try to go in at a specific time and leave by a specific time. But then again, there were nights that I was there until 10 p.m. just because I was on a roll. I pretty much just ride the roll as often as I can. I do try to sit down almost every day, but yeah, lately I've been bad at keeping a routine, but I'm trying to get back into it.
One more quick one. Did they really have a big fish tank?
No, but they did have a little model that had like glass in it. So some of the windows in Wonderland that I based the fantasy one on were little illusions. They were little dioramas. So the fish tank one was inspired by one that I read about where they had a little, it was like backlit with electricity, which was pretty revolutionary. And so you would look in and you would see a little ocean world. And they had a bunch of them along the wall. I'm trying to think about any other creatures they had in there. It was monkeys, parrots, and then normal pets like dogs and cats at various times.
All right. Look, one more last question.
Sure.
This one's from me. Do you have any advice to aspiring writers out there listening tonight?
Absolutely. I could fill another whole hour with that. But I will say, aspiring writers, keep going. Keep going no matter what, because writing is harder than you think. It's not like a school assignment where you just dash it off, hand it in, and then someone goes, wow, well done, you're published. But you know, it requires stamina. I will not say never give up on a story, because I've given up on loads of stories and found that to be the right thing to do. But I will say keep on trying in your writing in general. Keep experimenting, try different things. You know, I used to be very good at keeping a weekly blog, and mostly I would put up a poem for those. So yeah, it's gonna be difficult, because succeeding in the arts is difficult. But you know, if you really, really want it, just keep pressing on. Grandest was accepted on its 3rd submission, which is very, very, very wonderful and very, very rare. But the 2 manuscripts that I was querying before that, they were complete books. They had won awards and stuff, or, you know, manuscript awards and mentorships and stuff. Those two were rejected by agents and publishers, I think 45 times. So you've just got to keep pressing on.
Don't give up. That's the
yeah.
Okay.
It's you've got to be strong. Basically, you will get knocked back. But what's important is to keep trying. And sometimes you won't know why you got knocked back. Sometimes you'll get knocked back for a reason like, I loved it, but it's not for me. And you're like, what the hell does that mean? But, you know, it's subjective. And sometimes you're not going to know what's wrong with it. Something might not be wrong with it. Just keep on going, keep querying, keep writing new stuff. And if you can't get a certain story off the ground, a helpful way of looking at it is see it as your practice. Because like a musician who can fill a concert hall, like a concert pianist, say, or violinist, they've got to put in so many hours of squeaking away. So if you have a book that you never manage to get published, looking at it as a waste of time is really unproductive. Call it your practice instead. You've got to put in your practice hours. People think that just because you write a book, that's enough in itself to get published. And unfortunately, it's not. But if you see a book that doesn't get published as your practice rather than as a waste of time, you'll find you have a much more positive mindset when you approach the one that might get published, which is your next one, or maybe the one after that, or maybe the one after that. It takes some time. I think I have about 13 shelved manuscripts. Granted, some of those were written when I was a teenager, but
yep.
Keep on trucking.
Excellent advice there from you, Amelia. We'll wrap it up there now because we've taken up so much of your time. It's been wonderful listening to you and having you show us your special artifacts, your creative processes. It's really something that we have all enjoyed so much. So thank you very much. A huge thank you to Affirm Press for partnering with the State Library on our summer book club program. And if you haven't already, head to your public library, download the indyreads app. It costs nothing to buy. And as Mr. Cole would have said, read for as long as you like, no one asked to buy.
Oh, he would go nuts for that.
He would have approved of indyreads. So thank you, everybody. And thank you, Amelia.
Oh, thanks everyone for coming. Oh, I can see so many questions. Where do I find the patience? It's not a question of patience. It's a compulsion. I have to do it. It's my creative outlet. I can see people leaving, but
lots of thank yous. Loving historical based books, great for learning.
Oh,
thank you, Amelia.